For our final week, we're going to talk about an area of leadership communication that requires us to put pretty much everything we've learned in the past 14 weeks into practice. I'm talking about communications related to issues and crises. It's being able to successfully manage issues that crises can sometimes be avoided. And if you find yourself in a crisis, being able to communicate effectively can help it from growing even larger and will also help speed along your recovery. To be able to effectively manage issues and crises, you need a solid understanding of how to manage perceptions. There's a great quote from Kirk Smith from the East-West Center in Hawaii in the booklet A Primer on Perceptions of Risk Communication, and Building Trust. Smith says, "Statistically speaking, there's far greater chance of being run over by a motorboat than being eaten by a shark. The reality, though, is that no one will ever make a movie called Propeller." So when you're living with an issue or crisis, it's all about the impact of stress, fear, and the unknown, and those factors can combine to heighten risk perception. Risk perception is where perception becomes reality for people. Perception is influenced by many factors, including previously held views or biases. Trust and emotional factors can take precedence over rational factors. That means that your communications need to be aimed at responding to rational, personal, and emotional reactions. And what happens when you're stressed or fearful? Think about the last time you got really angry about something. Was it more difficult to understand and process information when you were in that stage? What about what families of patients who are waiting for critical tests or whose loved one may be in a critical state? Do they react and respond normally? Communication effectiveness can drop by as much as 80% when a person is stressed or fearful, according to the Center for Risk Communication. This leads to denial of the issue. It can also lead to competing information, angry or emotional responses, and/or shock. It also creates significant challenges, particularly if the person is forced into a response mode. Stress, fear, and the unknown also bring about a condition of negative dominance. This is where the public thinks the worst. The Center for Risk Communication argues that for every 3 positive messages carries the weight equal to 1 negative one. So you really need to be careful about negative positioning. You need to watch your language, but don't give up credibility. Your goal is to focus on building trust. How do you build trust? Show empathy. Demonstrate caring. Be honest. Show openness. Demonstrate your commitment. Be dedicated. Show competence. Provide expertise. And your nonverbal communication is also very important. Make sure you consider all aspects such as images, staging, etc. So what is an issue? There are a couple of different definitions. One is a problem that hasn't reached the point where it threatens to undermine credibility or seriously damage an organization. There's another one that says the gap between an organization's performance and the expectations of its stakeholders. Really, there are 4 types of issues. There are potential issues, which are trends or ideas not yet in the public domain. There's emerging issues, where one or more publics maybe start pushing an issue. There are current issues, which are issues that are enduring, maybe require intense or have intense interests or calls for action. And then a crisis is the highest level of an issue. And this is where there's a high risk of significant impact for your organization. So in responding then, as leaders, we need to remember 5 things. The first is the public has a legitimate interest. Secondly, we need to plan carefully. We need to listen. We need to be transparent. And finally, we need to show compassion. So what's the role of leaders? The first rule is to consider what you would do with a variety of scenarios. Don't wait for an issue to turn into a crisis before you act. You should really start planning now. Identify what potential risks are present in your environment or could be present. Think your strategy through. How would you respond? Who would do what? What kind of procedures would be needed? Remember back a few weeks ago when we were talking about Grunig's theory of the publics. He's also got several crisis principles. The first is the relationship principle. An organization can withstand both issues and crises better if they have established good long-term relationships with the publics who are at risk from the decisions and behaviors of the organization. Grunig's second principle is the accountability principle. Organizations should accept responsibility for a crisis, even when it's not their fault. Then there's the disclosure principle. At a time of crisis, an organization must disclose all it knows about a crisis or problem. If it doesn't know what happened, then it must promise full disclosure once it has additional information. And finally, the last of Grunig's crisis principles is the symmetrical principle. At a time of crisis, an organization must consider the public interest to be at least as important as its own. Public safety, for example, is at least as important as profits. Therefore, the organization has no choice other than to engage in true dialogue with its publics and to practice socially responsible behavior when a crisis occurs.